Hello and welcome back to Imperium Code channel. So before we proceed, I need to mention that this is part 2 of why you should not be client obsessed. And if you haven't seen part 1 already, please go to the link in the description below and make sure to watch it to get more context and to actually understand what we are talking about. It's pointless to watch part 2 without watching part 1. Anyway, so in part 1, we discussed briefly about what happens when you are client obsessed and what are the main issues that you might be facing, etc. And I believe that the list we mentioned in part 1 is not really extensive. That's why we have to go through even more details before jumping into the next part of starting to solve and these issues and how to approach the business by design. So let's start first with capacity, and this is something that's critical. Sometimes you start working with a client and you understand that they have a certain capacity to build a project, financial capacity that is, be it financial or even be it other kind of capacity. Sometimes it's not only financial, it's sometimes related to uh, logistics, sometimes it's dependent on different resources that the client might need to have in order to be able to get involved in the project and to even start the project. Anyway, so let's start with the following case. So assume you already aligned with your client and the client told you, yes, I have enough funds, etc. I can start working, I can start building the project, let's proceed to a proposal. And then at the end of the day, when you want to start, you discover that no, the client didn't actually have the money at hand, for example, for the first payment. He or she or the entity has assumed that they would have it in time because they had a certain promise from their investors or they had a certain commitment from another third party that they're working with, or even a client of theirs that they would be paying them a certain amount and that the amount would be enough to uh, pay the initial payment of the project, for example, or whatever payment that might be due before starting the project. And then you discover that no, the client only was hopeful enough to really wish that everything would simply work out magically well and that you wouldn't be facing any issues, thus putting you in a tough spot where you either need to wait for his investor or just stop and halt the entire project and not proceed any longer. And this is related to multiple factors, one of which is how credible is your client really, because he or she might be only assuming certain things, and there might be no bad intentions behind this, and they really thought that they would be getting the payment on time and be able to really deliver on time. Or it may also be from a malicious intent, or this is simply how they operate and they are careless and this is more dangerous. And but both cases, and whatever the reason is, you just had you just experienced this issue and the damage is done. There is no going back. The damage would have been actually been done. So yeah, so let's dive more into this. Sometimes you even the client is certain and they have actually aligned with their investors and everything, but then suddenly the investor or partner might change their mind and then become suddenly not ready because of an other investment that they started showing interest in, or another project that's more priority, etc., etc. And all of these delays and all of these issues and causes they don't eventually matter. What matters is that simply the capacity wasn't there. It was assumed that it was there, and then everything was built on top of that assumption, and damage was done on you, on your resources, the contractors you're working with, and on the whole forecast of the whole business income, etc., and on the client themselves, clients themselves, or the client himself or herself, because eventually their work got delayed. Another scenario is when you find out that after aligning with your client on all of the details, on all of the payment terms, on all of the policy and requirements needed to start the project or whatever, and the way of work, you believe that everything's good and we need to start, and then you suddenly find out that this person, your contact person, was satisfied. However, they have a dependency on another partner that they need to get their approval first, and you find yourself in a position where you either have to also repeat everything from scratch and explain everything to them. Also, there are alternatives of also choosing to stop working with them, or simply, in other words, in general, whatever approach you went with, also the damage have been done. And it's as simple as it may be, but figuring out the dependency and handling the dependency is something that is critical, because even if the person you're talking with was the decision maker, that person can be influenced by other parties, other personnels, sometimes even by his wife or her husband, or a family member, or a friend, a dear friend to them, etc. So you really need to make sure that this is something that is also handled. Another thing that you expect, we actually spoke about in part 1, however, it has even more scenarios that are more dangerous. For example, when it comes to your client being responsive, we spoke about how your client should be responsive when it comes to getting feedback on a certain delivery or a component to be tested, so that you don't delay the project. But also, the same case applies whenever your client is actually waiting for the contract to be sent, and then you send it as agreed, and then suddenly you find out that the contract has been sitting there in their inbox for a day to 1 week, 2 weeks, and you have no reply, and you try to reach them, and you face delays. And the problem here is that you might have already locked your resources so you reserved the contractors that you're working with to start on a specific date, and you planned everything accordingly. And this simple act of not being responsive caused delays, caused you lack of credibility, because at the end of the day, you are a client yourself to your own contractors or even employees. So if you end up telling them that yes, we will start this project by Monday, and then this gets delayed, and then you tell them okay, it's by next Tuesday, and then this gets also delayed, and then you push it another week, other than the fact that you're losing money and they're losing money and they're probably even losing projects, you're actually getting affected by credibility. How can your own employees or contractors trust you anymore? So the damages are even more than you can even expect on a short and a long term as well. So these are all issues that you face, and more issues that you face are sometimes they happen from an earlier cause. For example, as simple as the requirement of the project were not even signed before starting. So you agreed on the requirement verbally, virtually, you sent some documents by email to each others. You said yes, maybe this document works in a call, and then you added some notes, and then you just started working. And then when you finish the work, or when you deliver a certain feature, you find that no, you weren't aligned on it, and each one is referencing another document or another note or another bullet that was discussed during verbal conversation. So at the end of the day, also the damage was done on the client side, and regardless if you're right or wrong, you have lost time, you have lost also credibility, you may have caused damage to the client side, and the project turned out to be missing a feature or having a feature that doesn't make sense to be also even built in the whole project. So not only the requirements would have this issue, other issues would be caused by simply not being aligned on how you want to deploy the project and when you want to publish the project. Sometimes the client assumes that you want to deploy and publish the project as soon as you finish the testing phase and even before the final payment. Sometimes it's not the case, and sometimes the client assumes that any issue with the deployment is handled by you, even if Apple or Apple Store or the Play Store, Google Play Store, decided to release some new terms that weren't there before, which forced more updates to be done and features to be done on the app that weren't in your timeline. Would that be handled by you, or would that be handled charged extra to the client side? Who agrees on what should be done? Who decides what should be done? And how can you agree with your client on that? Now, all of those issues are mainly happening due to miscommunication or lack of communication or postponing the conversation, simply postponing the call or the meeting that you should be doing eventually to discuss all of those points. And sometimes it's even worse, it's due to neglect. You say, yeah, it's obvious details. I'm sure I will not have any issues with my client on these minor details because they're obvious and anyone would think the same way as I do, and it's not true. And the thing is, all of those issues and other issues that you might be facing might be related purely to your client or purely to you, but regardless who's the cause of the issue, it's up to you to manage them because it's your business. You are the service provider. And sometimes the issues are actually totally from your side. For example, sometimes you start discussing with the client, you proceed to the next steps, you align on all of the details, etc. But then you find yourself that you are not actually ready to take the project yourself. You don't have enough resources, or you don't even have the qualified resources. And you're just hoping that your resources, the programmers or contractors that you have may be able to learn the new technology or the new scope of work that you're trying to be building to build. And then you find yourself that, yeah, I cannot even build it, and you start improvising, and this is even worse because you have committed to provide a certain service with a certain quality to a client that you don't even know the first thing about, or have 70% knowledge, but it doesn't matter. Even you have 99% or 90% knowledge about the topic, you still have the remaining 10% that you're actually gambling with the client's money and with their time and with their trust, etc. And it might work, it might not, but something that certainly cannot scale. You cannot always risk. Eventually, one small issue might delay you for 2-3 weeks, and it would be trivial, maybe, yeah, in terms of an issue, and it might be solved easily after you understand what's happening. But the delay would be would have been would have happened, and the quality would have been affected, especially your seniority level to the client. They would start feeling that, yeah, you are not who you pretend to be. You are much less, maybe even worse. you might be conceived as a hypocrite. So they might think you are actually a hypocrite. Anyway, so you know, this is something that happens. This reminded me of an issue that really happens. Also, not only when your resources are not ready, but when your qualified resources are actually working with a certain point of contact that the client assigned, and then you find yourself also being stuck or um, being forced to switch from one contact person to another randomly across the timeline of the project, and sometimes third party people, let's say, they intrude on the project's life cycle. So for example, imagine you're talking to person X, and then after agreeing on a certain feedback for a specific feature, and moving forward, you hear then from a certain Y that no, a certain person Y, that no, this feature is not really going to work this way, and it needs to be changed, it needs to be fixed, there's a certain bug that no one spotted, etc. And then you find that suddenly your client asked for the approval of their own designer, or the other contractor that is not working on the project actively with you under your services, under your company. The designer was hired by the client separately, and the client asked him or her to assess your work and to provide certain feedback on the quality of the UI you are providing to his company. And then suddenly you have another input that's coming that you didn't expect to have. And the problem isn't really with the input itself. Sometimes the input is actually valuable and constructive and helps everyone, but it's more about getting random input from different people, different parties, different service providers, with no one person being the final say. So who do you end up working actually um, with, or like listening to? So you reach a place where your client is not really defined. You thought that I'm dealing with person X and I aligned with person X, and then you find yourself dealing with the designer, dealing with person Y, dealing with their brother or sister or relative or friend, and then what? How do you manage to get all the feedback you need and close the project properly? And even sometimes you spend time on the project and you give your clients the tips and tricks in order to understand how to build the project before starting the development phase. And you start building the requirement. Actually, you start defining the requirement, and you define what the proposal should need to include. And then your client would simply disappear and might not come back. And even if you have spent 3-4 hours with the client, or like 6 hours, these 6 hours were just given for free. They took what they need, they took your information, and they disappeared. And imagine having to do that with 10 clients. That's 60 hours. Or even imagine if it's 3 hours per client, that's 30 hours. So what about 20 clients? What about 100 clients? So these are hours being wasted for free, for nothing, just for the sake of being afraid of losing the client if you had them pay for your consultancy session. Because every word you say is eventually based on experience. And most of the clients, they come shopping around, they take what they need from you, and they disappear. And then you find that, okay, I have spent this month talking to 20 clients and I barely got one to sign the contract. So The list, I'm sure, is even more extensive than this. However, now that we've spoke about the different issues and points and things that might arise throughout a project's life cycle from the moment you meet the client until you close, we can start talking about the approach, how you approach the business, how you approach the solution or the design of the business in order to prevent all of these issues from happening by design. At Imperium Code, we believe in a preventive approach, not a corrective one, which means that you can wait until the damage happens with the client and try to fix it, or you can try to prevent the damage from happening altogether, or any issue from arising altogether. And in order to prevent it, you have to have a solid design. You have to define all of the states, all of the phases properly, how to jump from one phase to another, when to mark a phase as closed, and how to proceed to the next. And you also have to define your input, and this is something we spoke briefly about in the first conversation. You have to really define the input. So who are the clients and what are their characteristics and way of work and policies and whatever that allows you to be able to really serve them to the best quality that you can actually deliver. And it's as simple as first knowing your own expertise and potential, of course, and then two, making sure that your way of work, your way of operations, the need and the requirement for the operations of your company to actually work properly are actually well defined and well clear and very explicit, so that you can accordingly build your requirements, your your input definition or restriction or the actual domain or range of clients that you actually can serve. And to be more explicit, you have to, whenever you start working with a client, you have to make sure that this client understands your policy, understands your way of work, can operate the way you are operating, is not going to have issues if they choose to operate the way you're operating. It's not only wishful thinking, it's not only, oh yes, he would like to try, but then he or she might fail, and then reach a place where, okay, poof, explosion, issues happening, because yeah, we tried to make it work, but it didn't. No, it's either aligned by definition or it's not. And this is what you have to figure out, because once you accept the client, once you let the client in through your door, you have opened the door, you have accepted to serve that person or that entity or whoever. You have to be able to deliver, and you have to see the project all the way to the end, no matter what, because this is something that is critical to your business reputation, to your actual to everything that you're doing. And any damage that may happen, it's on you. Even if it's not your fault, it's on you, because it will be added as a bad point to your reputation. Regardless of what you say about your reputation, the client will simply speak badly of it or negatively of it. So this is really critical, and this is why at Imperium Code we have built our client selection policy. It's not to select the good or bad client, or the wealthy versus poor client, or whatever. It's to be able to select the clients that are really in the proper mindset, and that appreciate our work and value what we're doing and understand what's happening and the necessity of all of those details that we have spoke about. And these clients eventually trust us, they trust our services, they trust the quality of work that we deliver, and they trust the direction that we guide them to, because they know that we are the service provider and that we are qualified in our domain. But however, in order for them to be able to trust us, they need to understand our mindset, they need to understand how we approach the business, they would need to understand different things, and we need to also understand more about them, because if we believe that we cannot serve them, then we cannot trick them into trusting us. This applies to anyone who's conducting a business. So from a computer engineering perspective, it is pretty simple. If you try to open a certain file in an Excel document, try to open an image in an Excel document, it won't open. You can insert the image. You can choose your file, you have the tools, you can insert, and you can choose to insert an image, and then you can choose the image and it would insert an image. But you cannot even say that I want to insert an image and then choose another Excel file, even if you're opening Excel. And you can also do that. You can open any Excel file, but you cannot open a version that is 2015 or 2020 on Microsoft Excel 1997. Both are Excel files, but it's simply not compatible. It doesn't know how to serve it. Yes, they have the same formulas, yes, they might have the same content, but it just doesn't know how to read the format and how to serve it. So it's not only about the extension of the file, it's about the compatibility. It's about being able to process it fully without errors. Otherwise, it would simply choose not to process it and it would give you an error. It would tell you, error, I don't recognize this file. And it's the same thing what we're doing here. When we meet a client, we need to first understand if we can process and serve that client fully and understand all of their needs. Otherwise, we just throw this exception and say, no, we cannot, because if we try to, we can't. It will blow up. It will cause a lot of damages and issues on both sides. So it's not a matter of preference, it's a matter of science. And this is how we modeled our entire system, our entire business model. Imperium code is exactly like that. It's a state machine with well-defined input when it comes to even clients, and not only clients, but also the resources that are working with us. We cannot just work with any developer out there. There's a qualification policy, there's a qualification and training program, etc., so that we can make sure that, yes, we would be able to know how to work together in order to deliver the business, the actual need, the quality that we are actually aiming to deliver. It's not only the client that needs to be well selected, but it's also the resources that you're working with, obviously, that need to align with your way of work, mindset, way of documenting code, how you approach your code, how you make it scalable, etc. And not only coding, any services, be it UI, UX, consultancy, or anything else. So, practically speaking, we spoke really about all of the issues of when it comes to being client obsessed. And the point is, when you stop being client obsessed and you start focusing on your business, on your architecture, on your model, on what can you actually do and who can you actually serve, then whoever you end up serving, given they are within the right input range that you have defined, you would be able to serve that a person or entity the right way. And then eventually, they say birds of feather flock together. Eventually this person or entity would tell others like them about your business, and then you will get more clients like that, etc. And the clients that you cannot serve will simply not refer you to other clients like them, so you will have less likelihood of having to say no, and you would find yourself in a place where, yes, all of the clients that, or most of the clients that are coming my way, are actually within the same mindset, and I can actually serve them. And this is the result. It's not the goal. And this is the key. Being client obsessed means that the goal is to have or to win the client no matter what. However, not being client obsessed does not mean that we don't want the client, but it means that we only will work with the client as long as A, B, C, D, E, F conditions and terms and circumstances and policies and wherever things requirement that needs to be there to be able to serve that client are met, and then you can make sure that it's safe to proceed. There's no issue, and even if eventually any issue ended up happening, it would be something that's trivial enough to be able to for you to be able to solve with really minimal damage on both sides, and that you can actually learn from and re-input to your system and business model and architecture, etc. So I really hope you got you benefited from this, and you can reflect on what we spoke about today, because it makes really all the difference. And although it's really hard, especially in rough economical times like these, to say no to a client, but eventually it's much better to serve the right client within the right standards and approach than to serve the wrong client for you and end up having to spend a lot of effort and a lot of attempts and workarounds to just make something work, and eventually, no matter what you do, you will still not be able to make that client happy. And it would be, you get your final payment or whatever currency you end up getting paid in. But I mean, what are you going to do with the money? You have practically used all of your energy, all of your health, all of your resources to get that functioning or delivered, the project to be delivered, and it was all for peanuts, relatively speaking. While if you end up serving the right kind of clients for you, then you would spend much less effort, you would have much less hassle, and then the results would be amazing, and the scalability would be much easier on all sides. So stay tuned, and don't forget to share, like, and subscribe if you didn't already, and I'll see you soon in our next episode.